I want to start with the Tua lineups and see what they look like. I'm very interested in these this week. I don't know how they're going to sim out, but I'd like to try it. And with Tyreek Hill's price point, I think there's still plenty of meat left on the bone. I'm not as worried personally about his I'm not as worried about the torn ligament in the wrist. He was out there, he played a lot. They just couldn't get anything going. They won, but they only had like 260 yards of total offense. So not super worried about this. He still played 87% of snaps, Greg. So here's how I want to start the build, and then I want you to throw the next guy in. All right. And then you'll start the next build. I want to go Hill, Achane, and Tua and see what it looks like. Because if there's ever a running back that you can play in a double stack, right now there's nobody better than Devon Achane. He's the number 2 receiver on this team. So that's how I want to kick it off. Hill, Achane, and Tua Tagovailoa. Tua's what, 6K or 5,900 or something. Hill's 74. Achane's up there, but deservingly so. So let's do it.
Yeah, it's funny, by the way. The other running back who I'd say is most playable in stacks is the other running back that you get the most exposure to in the Sims right now, and that's Kamara, just because of how involved he is in the passing game. But yeah, totally agree with you. Achane, Tua, Tyreek Hill, totally reasonable way to be starting a stack here. And what does that leave us here? 4,900 in salary. So let's just find.
Wait, let's do deep. Yeah, sorry, cheap defense.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's look at some of the cheap defenses that are viable to roster for this week. Just so we kind of have an idea of what salary we have left. And there's actually a handful of them. There's
the easiest one, in my opinion, Tennessee, with the way Sam Darnold has been throwing picks left and right lately. What do you think about that?
I was going to say also the Jets at $2,800, just because I don't have that much confidence in Joe Flacco right now either.
No, neither do I. But what if we just try to go as cheap as possible first and see what it gives us? Because look how well the Titans project at 2,300 too.
Yeah, they're 2,300. There's actually a handful of defenses sub 3K that show up in lineups in the Sims. Titans at 2,300, Jets at 2,800, Bills at 2,700, Colts at 2,600, Patriots at 2,500. And I know people might go like, ew, the Patriots. Well, Patriots were pretty good last week from a fantasy standpoint, and the defense scoring ends up being pretty random. So yeah, I'm totally cool with the Titans defense at 2,300.
Where do you want to go elsewhere? I'll take the next spot or two here and see what we can build out. So where are we at now from a South? That gives us 54 with a tight end. Like if we wanted to just plug Davis Allen in at tight end, it's not the craziest idea in the world. I think he should actually be projected higher than that. We might see it come up a little bit.
So you got Davis Allen at 2,500. Who are some of the other cheap tight ends who show up on the slate? Jonnu Smith at $3,800 if we wanted to make it a triple stack. He's somebody who's relatively cheap. Hunter Henry shows up in lineups at $3,900. Juwan Johnson, we talked about him a little bit last week. He's at $3,400. We kind of had the right idea by talking about Juwan Johnson last week in terms of somebody who was going to have to catch passes for the New Orleans Saints. It just ended up being MVS had the massive, massive fantasy game, but I don't hate Juwan Johnson here either at 3,400.
You can
plug in Juwan Johnson.
Yeah, sure. Plug him in. I'm perfectly fine with that. I will say, I think our projection on Davis Allen comes up. And the reason I say that is because this is a guy we try and, provide some context and analysis instead of just building lineups. That might get boring. I said it a lot throughout the week. Like I'm low on Parkinson, hammering the under on props. I didn't know what to expect from him, but I expected him to continue the downward trajectory. And that's what looking at these type of stats can do for us. He played 16% of snaps last week. Davis Allen the last 2 weeks has played 55 and then 80% of snaps. And it gets even crazier when you consider that this guy ran, you'll find this nuts, right? 44 routes on Monday night, 44 routes on 50 dropbacks. That's a $2,500 tight end.
Yeah, so if you look at the work he got last week, it wasn't a big fantasy game, but because of all the routes he ran, to your point, I mean, he still had 6 targets, caught 5 of them for 34 yards. I don't think he's some guy who has a massive ceiling with like a super high depth of target or anything like that, but he is so cheap that I don't really think it matters for this particular week. At $2,500, if we're hurting for salary savings, then yeah, I would be totally cool with him being in lineups. The caveat being that if there is a bunch of value that opens up by the time that we get to Sunday, then maybe we don't need those salary savings to go all the way down to 2,500. But yeah, I'd be totally cool with including him in some lineups here. Handful of cheap tight ends. I do slightly prefer Juwan Johnson as of now, but I wouldn't have an issue with Davis Allen being in lineups. And just to save a little bit more salary, let's go Estime at running back, Jordan. That's Estime.
Okay, you want to throw Estime in there? Okay,
Yeah.
let's try it. So we'll go Juwan Johnson, Estime, and that should open some things up. The only thing I hate using Estime with at running back is there's so many good running backs on this slate that like I so badly want to just try and get to all of them, but we won't be able to. So I'm okay with that against Atlanta for sure. 2 wide receivers and a flex, $6,400 remaining. Okay. So I think one of the things we can do here is go like I said this to Ben yesterday. I actually like the Jacoby Myers run back. And I don't think you always need the run back, but I think Jacoby Myers as the run back option actually looks good here. 5,600.
Yeah. And especially now that Devontae Adams is out of the mix. Not that, I mean, Devontae Adams isn't playing well with the Jets. He wasn't really having a good season with the Raiders either, but he still was somebody who was commanding targets. If you look at the volume that Jacoby Myers has gotten over the last handful of weeks, it's significant. He had 11 targets last week, caught 8 of them for 105 yards. And also, it just shit quarterback play for the Raiders. It hasn't mattered. He's just getting there with volume. He's now had at least 7 targets in 5 consecutive games, and he's had 9 targets in 4 of those games. The volume is very clearly there for him. So I think Jacoby Myers is somebody who, I agree with you, even actually outside of Stacks and him being a run back, I just think he's a good mid-range wide receiver option.
Me too. So let's plug them in. And we really haven't needed to force run backs this year. It's been, even last year, we've seen kind of a trend getting away from that, but I like it here. Now we have 6,800 to work with. So here's my question. Do we want to jam a top tier running back in the flex spot? If we were to do that, like, let's say you just threw Kamara in there, well, actually, I don't want to play him with Juwan. I don't think it's crazy to do that, but I don't think we have to. Like if you threw Kyron in there, that gives us 5,700, or do we want to try and go more balanced here?
Let me see. Let me get like a good feel for some of the pricing at wide receiver. There isn't anybody who's that cheap that there are guys who show up, like if we wanted to plug in a Jake Bobo or Kendrick Bourne shows up. So like these are guys who would sim out kind of decent. I don't love either of them though. Let's see. What is Jake Bobo seen for volume?
Well, this is also, I don't want to play him because this is also, I think right now under the assumption that Metcalf doesn't play, but it's been almost a month since he strained that MCL.
And even without him, there's been no volume for Jake Bobo.
No.
But 1 target in 3 consecutive games. So, like, I get why you just kind of have to allocate some of those targets to somebody, why he would project kind of okay. But yeah, DK Metcalf, if there is a game that would be most important for him to come back for, it would be this game against San Francisco. San Francisco hasn't been great. Seattle also, they started the year really well. They've had some super disappointing losses. They should be in the playoff mix right now if it wasn't for a terrible loss against the Giants. They blew a game against the 49ers as well. So I think DK Metcalf probably more likely to come back than not this week. Yeah, I'm thinking about the question you had asked. And to me, I think the answer is I'd rather have 2 mid-range plays here than 1 punt and then paying up at flex.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. The running back position is just so good. Like, all right, here, let me give you an example of somebody. What if we throw, let's just try this. Let's try
Okay.
throwing Jameer Gibbs in.
Okay.
He projects well for us here. We've seen more work going to him recently in the run game as well. They are 13-point favorites against the Jags, who are likely without Trevor Lawrence. We know this team likes to run the football. That still gives us 6,300 for the final wide receiver spot. There's got to be someone decent down there.
Let's see. What's in the 63 or 53?
Yeah, 63. And,
Oh,
and
60,
we
63
do
is easy. You can just plug Shakir in.
right. That projection will be changed throughout the week without question. Has to be. Do you not think so?
It depends on the health of the other guys on Buffalo. Because going forward, like I still think that if we still have Amari Cooper out and if Dalton Kincaid potentially isn't going to play, then I think we should expect a bigger workload for Shakir.
Oh, definitely. And of course, it does depend on Kincaid. It depends on a lot of these guys. This lineup will sim out well. I know that. There you go. Yeah, 161. That looks fantastic, right? You've got the Tua, HN, Hill. You still have Shakir. You still have Myers, who is probably a little underpriced. You have Jameer Gibbs in there as well. The only place you had to punt was Estime and Jawan Johnson and defense, which we don't care about. So those stacks look pretty good to me this week. This lineup looks pretty nice. I do expect some things to change as the week goes on, probably even by the time we get to Friday, Greg. But as of now, I don't mind this type of build whatsoever.
No, I think this lineup looks pretty solid. I was a little concerned if we paid up for running back in the flex that we wouldn't have somebody that we could fit in at wide receiver. But yeah, that worked out pretty well. And Shakir, I think, looks like a really solid option there to finish out the lineup.